Welcome back, and thanks for joining us. So that we're now, for those of you who've just come in, this is the second of our 3 inputs today for the Hacklab. The Hacklab is a performance laboratory that's happening just across the river at Radial System, which will be one of the last events of CTM on Sunday afternoon. Everybody will, our 23 participants from all over the world, and those of us who are still healthy, somewhere close to 23 participants from all around the world, and my co-host Tad from Manila will be engaged in creating new performances collaboratively, which will form through the course of the week, and which involve lots of invention of tools and instrument and of themselves. And Pauline to my left is nodding because she's been also a participant in this program. I can't remember which year. It was two years ago? 3 years ago? They will start working when you start speaking, when the mixer comes on, I think. Or they should.
Is there a switch? Yeah, the switch is on. So normally it should work. This one works? Okay, thank you. Yes, I think it was 3 years ago, something like that, yeah?
Yeah.
For the fear, anger, love.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah, so 3 years ago. So we have different themes. This year's theme is Shapeshifters, which we're connecting to the talk today. But Pauline is also here in CTM Festival this year, performing as Bora at Schwutz on Saturday, also through the Amplify Berlin program, which is also delivered. Anna, one of the participant, Anna Jordan, or allegorist, one of the performers, participants in the Hacklab, is also part of this program, and also we're all staying up late Saturday. That's a memo to all Hacklab participants. We will have exactly the same amount of sleep deprivation Saturday because we go and support you all at Schwutz. And then further to my left is Eric D. Clark. It's hard to give Eric a bio because the short version of the bio is that Eric has been everywhere doing everything, and if something was going on, he was there. And I think also wanted to include you because in all of those different kind of artistic lives that you've always been pushing things forward and trying new things, which is always romantic to talk about, but you know, I think that kind of pushing music and music practice forward is actually quite challenging in reality and requires some reinvention and imagination.
What do you mean?
It's easy.
What's easy, music?
Yeah, I don't know. That's
Well, I mean, it comes naturally, so it doesn't really start anything out of my daily life, actually. I mean, this is when you were talking, this is transformative?
Yeah. I had to look.
Because I also work as a music journalist, right? Or as a columnist for an art magazine. And it's interesting because it's not at all the same as sitting down and composing something. And if you have to think in terms of a column, it comes regularly, and you have to give it, you have your time frame. Then you have like an article or a review or an interview. And these things are a completely different hat to wear. But then as a musician, you have to leave all that behind and give something completely different to give, let's say, a performance that comes from your heart, to make something worthwhile as opposed to just commercial.
Well, I made it easy for myself as a writer, which is I made my writer life mirror my artistic life and just stopped writing for other people, so there were no deadlines. And then, and then I treated it exactly the same way. So that it was an easy solution. But yeah, it makes sense. So when things kind of come out of you naturally, right, then you just have to find a vessel to put them into.
No effort.
Yeah. And since the printed program promises an unannounced guest, so I fulfilled that by also inviting Tad, my co-host and also artist and writer and other things, and I didn't announce it to him until just now. So we've delivered.
Well, he has no microphone.
It's okay. We unannounced, don't get a voice. No, yeah. I didn't know, and Peter thought that I'd have something to contribute to the discussion, so sure, yeah. I hope I can.
Yeah. Well, Tad talked in his talk about, you talked sort of about animism as it relates to objects and places and sort of magical practices and the way that those deal with objects and places. I wanted to kind of get in this talk a little bit into the performance persona, because part of what we want to ask our Hacklab, well, I guess in your year in the Hacklab participants, we asked you all to just have emotions. Although this fear, anger, and love do usually fit into every year's Hacklab and festival. But we want to kind of do what we did in Manila and challenge some of the Hacklab participants to respond to the idea of the performance persona and what that means in their practice. What it means both to kind of transform themselves and what those kind of identities or masks might have for the audience. Because I think, something like this happened in Manila in terms of what came out, even obliquely. But just to kick things off, I want to kind of talk a little bit about what you all are working on now, just to kind of bring us into the present moment. Eric is in the studio with a kind of fun project.
Oh God, I've been in the last month. I was in the studio with Mouse on Mars and Lee Scratch Perry. I'm producing a band from Paris called the IQ. I'm the musical director for that one. And soon I'm working with Gregor Schwellenbach on a project that I started about 7 years ago called Music I Love You. And I think it's the Cologne Philharmonic. They're going to do the opening track of the album. I've never released the album, so it was worth waiting for, you see. Yeah, those are the three big projects, and then like little label things, production things, alter egos, other productions. I just scored a movie, Sammy Gate, by Noah Lawrence and Darius James, which is a film about Sammy Davis Jr., the Church of Satan, Richard Nixon, and the Vietnam drug wars. Yeah. And I'm very happy to be a part of that. It just opened the other day, premiered the other day at the International Film Festival of Rotterdam. Yeah, so I don't know, we were nominated for an award, but I haven't checked to see if we won anything.
How did you score that, or what does the score sound like with all those topics?
It's a combination of let's say like kind of like 70s blaxploitation type music, but I did it with a psychobilly band from Los Angeles called Spindrift. I just liked them a lot. They're really great guys, and because of they had an album called The Legend of God's Gun. And it was a great album. We liked it anyway. But then some film director in LA liked it. And he said, I want to see the movie. And they were like, it's not a soundtrack. It's just an album. He said, okay, I'm going to do a movie and you're going to be in it. And we're going to do a road movie to this album. And it rebirthed the album. It was like, they had no idea. They didn't want to do that at all. But he thought it had a film in it. And so he decided to make one with them. And this band are also friends with the director of the movie. And it was exchange. Sometimes I would meet them in LA. They came to Berlin once on tour, and we would exchange back and forth, files or whatever. And then also the other thing is that working on this particular project, I've done other movies before. You never really get to work that closely with the director. They usually contact you maybe 2 months or a month before they're finished wrapping the whole thing, so you don't really know what's going on. I was from the inception of this. I was working closely with the director and the screenplay writer to get an idea of where they wanted to go, how the themes were supposed to be structured, the atmospheres that they wanted to create with this. And I mean, that's great because I mean, it's completely outside of the realm of anything dance music or clubby, which is not my world anyway. I mean, I dabble in it, but I come from a classical background, and so when you were talking about transformative, being a concert pianist is not the same thing as being a DJ, I can guarantee you.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's a question. How did you kind of get from one to another? I mean, there's a difference in kind of the task that's there, but does that also mean does that kind of reshape who you are when you switch from one task to another? Sort of Eric the concert pianist to Eric the DJ?
As a classical pianist, I mean, you pretty much, unless you've got really, really good backing, you don't really get known as a composer.
Right.
So you're basically a jukebox. So anybody that tells you that, oh, so it's fabulous, you're great, you're talking about you compared to another interpreter doing the same thing generally. And that to me was not rewarding. And I did that when I was a child. So when I was a teenager, it was easy to leave that behind. because it was not rewarding in any way. It was just rewarding for the other people watching, and that wasn't rewarding for me. So, and I mean, I love music, obviously, so I decided to do it for myself. If you do anything for yourself, you'll always find somebody somewhere that's going to agree with you. And
Right.
you just have to tailor your audience to that. I don't really care about numbers. It's about the right numbers, you know? They're getting the right people. And I think that that's important when you want to present yourself. If you just want to present, it doesn't make any difference who you present to. If you want to present yourself, you have to be very, very protective of that. And I think it's important to, yes, wear that hat. Put that hat on for that. I mean, we're all in drag, actually. You know, every time you decide to put a piece of clothing on, you're wearing drag. So it's like whatever you want to, I start the day looking one way and I look a completely different way by the end of it, you know. And so that's everybody's potential.
Did that kind of evolve over time, the way that you approach that? I mean, it must. Even the kind of decisions about what to wear. This is a difficult topic in the techno scene that likes to avoid that decision if we can. I had a conversation with a friend yesterday, and she was like, "Man, I just want it." She's like, I don't even." She's like, "I can't even handle these fetish parties and things. I just want techno to be about hoodies and sweatpants because I don't want to have to decide to do anything else."
Yeah, I don't know. I've always been kind of a clothes horse, so I didn't really care. I mean, it's like, you know, the thing is, it's like, when you believe in what you're doing, it doesn't really make any difference how you present it. I mean, ultimately, and believing what you're doing also has a lot to do with believing in yourself. A friend of mine said he had stopped doing music for like 15 years. I said, why? Because of insecurities and shyness. I said, look, you can learn to be insecure, you can learn to be shy. Are you you? That's the basic thing. If there's any question there, then leave those other things behind and just concentrate on the thing that you know, that you should know. But if you're questioning yourself, then that's from the outside. That's not from inside. Yeah. You know, that's something that you've been conditioned to think, and yeah, just ignore it. Basically, is what I'm saying. You know. Yeah. But you were saying that you have a performance coming up soon.
Yes, on Saturday.
Saturday, okay.
Technically Sunday, but
Technically
we're in this
Sunday,
24-hour time. Yeah. But yeah, so tell us a little bit about that. So because you're also kind of costuming as part of this project.
Yes, I'm making my own costumes, my own masks, and yeah, I also do like 3D visuals, video, and sounds. Yes.
Do you find that kind of wearing those masks or wearing those costumes sort of helps your performance? Does it sort of shape the way that you play? Not only the way that you're seen, but is it something that you kind of feel as you're performing? Or do you practice with it, I should say, even?
I would say that those costumes like are an extension of myself, like because in my daily life I'm Pauline, but then I built this persona called Bora, and she's like, yeah, really like an extension of who I am, and it all comes from Pauline, but there is an extension of a sort of hyper reality. So I try to bridge like the inner signals with the outer, and be fully myself, because I do believe that we are all like multidimensional beings, you know, and so I can't be just one dimension. Like it's so much more complicated than that. Like it's a really complex architecture. So it's a way to accept myself as I truly feel that I am, and just go for it completely.
I'd like to know how easy it is to assume the persona if you don't wear the costume. Does the costume help generate the persona?
Yes, because right now I'm Pauline. I'm not Bora. So yeah, it's kind of hard to explain, but she's like she comes from like this, I don't know if you say hybrid or hybrid, like reality. Hybrid. So it's a connection between like a sort of immaterial reality, and the reality is what I'm now, but I try to merge a complex universe, and so she doesn't exist like all the time. Like it's kind of weird, but yeah. But at the same time, she's part of me, and she was born also like from the reality I'm investing now also. She comes from this, and also like all those emotions that you have in your inner life that sometimes coexist with the reality, like the concrete reality, and I try to grasp those unknown or indicible emotions and embrace them, because I believe that they are also part of me somehow. Yes.
And is she sort of like a heightened version of you? Or like, does it like the evil twin, you know, sort of like things that are usually kept like up, that are usually, yeah, sort of like in the shadow in your normal life, then she gives you an opportunity to where they play out? Or is it more like you? Like a more,
I
you know,
think it's
luminous version of you?
It's a good question, actually. I think it's a merge of the two. She's like part of my childhood, all my childhood dreams. Like there are a lot of images that come from that time, because when you're a child, you don't ask yourself if you can dream about this or that. You don't censor yourself. So I try to have this freedom back somehow, and when I enter that, I really try to accept it, even if it's failures, or I really try to make it, because I do believe that I'm not perfect, for sure. And so Bora, I would say, is the embodiment of this imperfection, but still she exists, and she morphs all the time, because already as Pauline, like I'm surfing on waves all the time, you know, like I'm trying to give birth to myself, like renew myself constantly. And this project is kind of following like my human life. So I don't know if I answered right to your questions, but so she's not like an evil twin, because I don't fear her. I just, try to be fully empowering what she can give also in terms of emotions to people. And yeah, I'm trying to be real and natural and connected to what I feel and who I am, basically.
Yeah.
I wanted to know this about how close is that to being like is it like an alter ego, or is it like a split personality, or is there something? Because because I've created other characters, but I usually didn't flesh them out until it was necessary. I didn't really take them to performance level.
Interesting.
And it's like there's a lot of them, and I don't think about them, but sometimes I get bored with my own name, so I use their names.
Okay.
And then somebody asks, "Oh, who is blah 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 blah?" Then I make up something, and nobody ever asks me if they exist or not.
So,
Okay, interesting.
so are these so you write in persona, or you just
I
like?
write songs in other people's names, but the people don't exist.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I like that's interesting.
I mean, I just do it because I get tired of seeing Eric D. Clark all the time.
And does the same name write the same sort of songs? Is like there a
Yes,
continuity?
they have styles. They actually have styles. Like Ken Chesterfield does a kind of a pseudo melodic techno, and
And how do you choose the names then?
Well, I have tons of stuff just laying around. I said, "Oh, this sounds like something that would be good for Kent, or this would be good for Epiphany, or this would be good for Senior Supple." You know, whoever.
So it's really spontaneous.
Yeah. But they exist. They've had releases for a while now. Yeah. But
I love
don't-
it.
Yeah, I like the fact also that it's in common with the two of you, is that you do very naturally speak about your other personas in the third person. It seems like proper usage, right?
Yeah,
Because they're
yeah.
not you.
Yeah.
I think other people have made up people, right? I mean, we all have at some point in our lives. It's not to be denied. You know, we
Yeah.
don't all need to see a therapist because of it.
I've often thought of it as it's sort of, well, having a separate persona is sort of like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've thought of it, I wondered whether it's something like an exaggeration of the idea that the angry you is different from the calm you, and they're both you, and
I
they're
think it's all
hugely
equal.
different, and it's just pushed a little bit further, where they're not different because of only a single emotion. They're different in a lot of other ways, but they're still you.
No, I think I'm pretty bitchy no matter what. Always, it's like, they're all the same. Really, really. And it can't be taken away. I mean, even if I had amnesia, I'd still be a bitch. It's just in my nature.
But because of your personas, you're a gang of bitches.
Yeah, basically, yeah. Bad bitches, bad. Yeah. So anybody want to ask a question? Don't they get to ask questions?
Oh yeah, the audience can absolutely ask questions. There's a kind of artificial. You wait until the end, and then that's usually everybody's forgotten what their question was. So now in the middle is.
I didn't know if it was the end or not. I was just asking. If
No. I like the idea. If there are other questions, if you raise your hand, I can actually. The lights are not so bright. I can see.
We're
So if some
blinded up
conversation kind of immediately spurs a question.
How can you
Don't.
see anything? I can't see shit.
Yeah. And you have some glasses.
There's one. There is a question.
Is there a person?
So how does the new persona emerge? Does it get born, or do you discover it, or do you get to know it?
Yeah.
I start?
When was Bora born? I guess. Yeah.
So, hard question. I guess it's a long process. At least for me, it was not born like this, because I started to make music with this name at the beginning, and it was only sound. And then it evolved slowly and slowly. I started to make my own visuals. I started to 3D scan my friends. I started to learn by myself how to extend this universe, because I've always been hyper curious, so I like to merge different mediums because they answer back to each other, which I found really interesting. And yeah, so for me, it took 5 years now, and it's constantly changing. Few years ago, I was not performing. I was just playing on my machines, not even using my voice. And now, since few months, I really start to enjoy performing on stage, making my own costumes, and it's hyper spontaneous. I don't really think about it. It just comes and I do it. So yeah, it's yeah. What about you?
I think the first time that I created a character was I was in a band in Paris, and we wrote a song, and for some reason it was about a vampire, and we had to give him a name. And I said, okay, Kent Chesterfield, because I smoked Kents and Chesterfields.
That's a great vampire name too.
Yeah, it was a cool vampire name. But then he
Clark Kent in there as well.
Yes, there's also that. So that became the first one. And then years later, I had something, and I didn't want to put my name on it, and I just put his name on it. And then it just started from there, and everybody said, who is this Kent Chesterfield? So I made up this bio of this guy, and it's actually...
So you wrote a story for this guy?
Yeah.
Wow.
But what's really funny is the director of this movie I was talking about, Noah Lawrence, he's known as J.X. Williams. Now, J.X. Williams is a fictional director. He's never existed. And what he did is he went around Hollywood and went to all of the C and D movie places and got all this that was literally crap on the floor, all the film footage that they weren't using, spliced it together and made a bunch of show reels by J.X. Williams. Okay? So J.X. Williams became this, the bio is, he worked with Russ Meyer and then went on to be the right-hand man to Wes Craven, and dabbled a little bit. Yeah, he made all this stuff, and they sent it around, and before you knew it, he was getting lecture requests in France and Switzerland, and they built him up into this big thing. Now, just before he did this movie, which was basically 8 years in the making, he's done the last 2 videos for Iggy Pop, Bootsy Collins, as J.X. Williams. But he's releasing this movie as Noah Lawrence, a.k.a. J.X. Williams. Because nobody in the States even knows who J.X. Williams is. He's a European thing.
Will that out the character, or people already know the connection?
The director is a character.
Yeah.
But he's actually a real person.
Oh,
as
yeah.
well. Yeah.
No, but I mean, will that people know that this dual identity is there, or does
They're
releasing it
getting
under
now.
that? Now they'll get it.
It is slowly coming together. But I mean, he's got books out and everything, and
But
How did he
you-
answer the lecture requests?
Sorry?
How did he answer the lecture requests? Did
I
he
think
come
that
and do any of
I
them?
think that somebody wrote a review about one of his films. Some some filmologist somewhere in France, like the really heady guy, probably just leave his house, just watch the stuff on the computer or something, right?
Right.
Yeah, and he just wrote about it, and it became this thing, and people were asking him to come give lectures at schools and teach courses and stuff like that, as J.X. Williams.
Wow.
Yeah.
Does he direct in character? I'm guessing not.
It's actually the character kind of took over him. It's just that's the reason why he had to put his name on this movie. Otherwise, it would have been J.X. Williams' movie.
Yeah, but I mean,
Yeah.
but I mean, like, does he, when he goes there, he goes on set and people refer to him as J.X. Williams? And
Yeah. They refer to him as J.X. Williams
Excellent.
and Noel.
And-
They know him both as Noel and J.X. Williams.
Okay, but Noel and Noel the director and J.X. Williams the director. So it's not like J.X. Williams has a high voice or something like that.
No.
It doesn't change. It's like not like two different people. Okay, wait a minute, I'm gonna call him. Yes, what do you want? Something like that.
No,
It's
no,
the
he's
same
just the same guy.
It's
He's
just-
the same guy.
He just has two online personas. It's sort of like not online, but he's written about.
Yeah, exactly.
yeah. Okay.
And they're both, J.X. Williams has a lot more write-ups than Noel Lawrence. A lot more. It's much more popular, yeah. He probably has a fan mail thing, too. I'm sure Noel
But
doesn't.
you say that you were writing.
Yeah, so-
So
yeah,
how do you
yeah, so
how
I'm-
do you do that? Like,
I make up stories for these people, and I make up the name first, and then see what they sound like, and I make up these. It's kind of like, I guess, a very good friend of mine makes dolls, for example. I guess it's the same kind of thing. It's just I don't have the effigy. It's just I would imagine it's the same thing as creating a doll.
and
yes.
are you getting inspired by your own life, like for writing like bios?
Oh
for this?
no! I take
No,
from
not at
all kinds of different people's lives.
Okay.
Yeah. It's kind of, I guess, the same way as they're doing with this AI thing nowadays. You're just taking a bunch of information and throwing it into the thing, and just building a new person. It's kind of scary if you think about it. But I mean,
Yes.
but then again, nothing that humans do is anything other than a reflection of nature anyway. So even this
Well
AI
said.
thing, it's like, why should we be afraid? If you're afraid of yourself, I guess you should be afraid.
Yeah, I think what was that? There's that story about bad trips. If you take mind-bending drugs and you're resisting it, that can create this fear that you have the bad trip because you have this fear of that the unitary self is dissolving and you're not going to be able to come back. And if you don't fear that, because it's like, what is the unitary self? But one more, your favorite suit kind of thing, your favorite mask. And if you allow it to sort of melt, then basically, it makes for a better, it's the fear of losing control that makes you suffer. Yeah.
That's a
Right.
good description of that seems a really good description of the creative process too, right? Because we've had creatively, I'm sure we've all had some bad trips, maybe for the same reason. Maybe that we get afraid of kind of losing control or aren't really liking ourselves while we're trying to do something creatively and things go poorly. And some great trips where it isn't that way, I assume.
When things don't go the way that you think they're going to?
No. I think this kind of the idea, if the bad trip is sort of the idea of you're afraid of yourself or overly trying to control the situation, and then you kind of unpleasant things happen. It seems like there's a parallel for some of those kind of difficult creative times where you have that sort of same feeling, and that the way out of it is also to kind of give into some of the experience or open up or try to like yourself a bit more. I don't know.
I'm not sure if I follow you. I mean, because luckily, as an artistic person, you kind of, or somebody who does the arts, you kind of work a lot with instinct anyway. I mean, at least I do. I don't know how everybody else does it, but I don't question things. If it seems natural, I just blurt them out. Whatever they are, musically, opinions, it gets me in trouble sometimes. But, hey, at least it's honest. It's not meant to be malicious. I think that there's a lot of fear of saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing, and that's not really part of creativity. Or it shouldn't be anyway. So I don't question too much. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how everybody else does it, but that's me. I don't question shit. Yeah. I just kind of just go with it. The column, they were saying, oh, deadline, 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 deadline. So I was like, okay, I'll be ready in like a week. I said, I have like more than half of it written. I had 2 lines written. 2 lines, and for 2 weeks I postponed. It's like, oh, it's almost done, it's almost done. And then one morning I woke up and the entire thing was finished, all 4 paragraphs.
Well, because you must have deadlines for creative projects too.
I don't
right?
really respect any deadlines, though. I mean, it's like because you know the thing is about creativity is like once it's out for the rest of your goddamn life. All right, deal with it. There's no deadline for that, you know. And so you might as well take your time and do it the way that you think is the way that you can defend it once it's out there. You know, I don't want to hear it's like, oh, I like it, but it should have been this way. It's like, don't talk to me about that. You know, if you can't just let the thing be its thing, if you have to explain it, then you have not done your job. You know, I don't want to hear about it. I don't talk about music. I do music. You know what I mean? It's like I really don't care what kind of software or hardware anybody uses. Is it a good song? You know? Like, am I getting some emotion from this?
Yeah, I agree.
Basically that. You know, so I don't question too much.
Although speaking of questioning things, there was another question in the audience that looked very enthusiastic. So now I'm curious.
Hello. On the subject of discussing and talking to your own stage personalities and alter egos, do they talk back? How does the dialogue between your personalities and your primary persona go? And Eric, do your characters also write stories about you?
I like that. Yeah.
So far, no. That's a good point, though. I think that there is actually one who's branching off, though. There is one that is branching off. I don't even know if it's a he or a she, but it's branching off. And it's starting its own thing. It's going to be in a whole nother piece because the piece that it was originally for isn't happening. So it's going to be in a new one. You'll hear about it soon, but they haven't written about me yet, no. That would be really interesting. Wow, you should give me your name. I'll dedicate it to you.
I get the feeling that some of their ears perked up suddenly under that.
The feeling of what?
Like if I had personas and then I heard that question and it would be like, huh. You know,
It's a good one.
suddenly
That's really
it's like,
good.
you know,
What do
all of
you
them,
do?
like, start to plot. Did you hear
What
that?
does he do?
Did you hear that?
What do you do? Fabulous. Okay.
So you're a writer or sort of a writer?
Okay. Very good.
Well,
Great question.
We're talking about music now. It's going well, I feel like. But that's just me. So
We're not really talking about music. We're talking about things around music.
that's true. Yeah. Yeah.
We're talking about dressing it up.
What about Bora? Does Bora talk back?
Yeah. Do your characters do for you?
Yes, because I don't. It's kind of hard to talk about this, but I don't separate her from me. So as I said again, like it's an extension. So it's always like if I could depict it in terms of gesture, it's this, you know. So it's kind of always communicating with me, and especially when I do perform through her or through this extension, I have access to emotions that Pauline would not, you know, handle somehow. Sorry? Yeah, exactly.
So the empathic communication, he said.
What kind of emotions does she feel that Pauline does not?
Existential.
So more angsty.
I do believe that those emotions are all necessary and all aligned. So I like to feel them all, because otherwise, like, I would not be able to balance them. But she's more bold, present, and she's fearful, but which makes her more like ready to go and share emotions with people. Where, like, as Pauline, like in my everyday life, I'm more reserved and shy also, and so this communication like makes me able to really empower my dreams also and my music, and yeah. But always with this this fragility is really important, I think, because otherwise like the presence and the fact to go on stage would not matter that much to me. Yeah. So I don't know if I answered your question, but
Yeah, I just want to make a note that etymologically, the word persona actually meant mask in the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah, it didn't mean another person, it meant a mask.
Quite interesting how masks are making a huge upswing in the
Masks are back.
in the past couple of years. I don't know if anybody's really noticed, but you see a lot of them lately.
You mean literally masks are making a comeback?
and how would you interpret that?
I think that it has to do with the entire cultural bullshit of transparency. I mean, which basically started back in, I guess, the late 70s, 80s, when they were doing all these buildings that were concrete and steel. Then all of a sudden the culture starts talking about transparency and banking. Then you have bank collapses, corruption, and now people are wearing masks. Do the math. I mean, it's obvious. You know, that's all control. You know, nothing happens for no reason. There is no chance. There is no schicksal.
So you think it's about like safety, like preserving your own?
Oh, I don't think about it. I just observe it. It's out there. I'm not thinking about it at all. No. I just see it. And, you know, just be diligent. Pay attention to what's happening around you. It's not all emojis and shit, you know.
As I'm thinking that the mask has sort of like two roles there, right? So one is that if you wear a mask, it sort of protects you. So it hides the real you. And then, but when you're talking about the persona being another part of you, the mask gives you access to another vantage, or another kind of truth, another way of looking at truth. So those are two different functions.
Well, you have to let's look at the mask in the role of the tribal cultures on the planet. You know, I mean, it was never a trend. It was just something that was part of their cultures. And so it has a completely different thing as opposed to what we have in the West, where we look at masks as an object. They looked at them as entities. That's why we have the word persona. You know, and the way we look at a lot of things is not necessarily correct. It's just an adaptation of what was once. But when you look at, like, let's say, the entropy, okay? Entropy is very interesting because you have it in culture all the time. But at the time, like, for example, if somebody hears one of these new remixes of Angie Stone's Can't Sleep, I Can't Eat Anymore, whatever that song was, I Wish I Didn't Miss You Anymore, right? Okay, somebody who hears it now, who's maybe 12, 13, 14 years old, is going to grow up thinking that that's the shit, that's the song. They're not going to know that it came out 10 years ago. They're not going to realize that it was written by Holland Dozier and Holland 30 years before that and sung by the Dojays. You know, come on. There's nothing in our culture that's lending to us giving that information back to the people. I've always been interested in the root of a thing. And now we've masked the roots to the point where there's absolutely no girth to the realness of it. It's just some superficial binary number that, you know, we've put out there, and you can forget about knowing the root unless you actually know somebody who knew the root. You know, because you're not going to find it in your logarithms. You're not going to find it in everyday culture. We know that the news doesn't give it to us. So,
Have you found a way to kind of stay connected to those roots, or sort of communicate them to people, or to kind of correct
ignore
this?
everything.
They ignore everything.
Ignore everything. Forget everything. Just ignore it all.
So you've given up.
I don't give up anything.
Not
I just
giving up, but
ignore it.
you-
Just ignore everything. You know, no outside influences. A friend of mine met Barry White in the Bahamas. This was really interesting. He had it was a long time ago, he had one of the very first Walkmans. And my friend was a huge Barry White fan. And he was just like, I want to talk to him. So finally, about 3 days into the trip, he finally went up to me, had enough nerve to say, Mr. White, what are you listening to in those headphones? What is that? And he said, oh, it was a Walkman. I said, what are you listening to? And he said, you want to hear it? I'm like, yeah. And he put it on. It was some random Barry White song he was working on. And he explained to him he doesn't listen to anything but his own music, ever.
Wow.
He never listens to anything else. I thought that was absolute genius.
Why?
Just because of the simple fact that you really have to be, in order to get, you know how they say, like, success breeds success? You know, it's the same kind of thing. When you believe in yourself that much, other people are going to believe in you. I mean, I don't believe that Prince would listen to anything else except to actually to learn it. You know? So that's a completely different thing. But like Barry White, who composed a lot of amazing stuff, and a lot of it didn't listen to anything but his own music. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't do it, but I don't think there's anything wrong with it.
Yeah, if it was his way. Like, there is nothing wrong about it.
I think that's genius. When you listen to what he's produced and from when he did it, I mean, that's pretty impressive.
And there, I mean, for all of us, there have to be, well, of course, again, to the Hacklab, not to contradict Eric, but please do come to the events this week and listen. But I think we must all go through kind of phases like that, right? So that there are times when you kind of need your ears to be your ears to be open.
Well,
Go out and
I'm
enjoy
a DJ
it.
as well, you know, so I would get bored listening to my own music.
Oh God.
You know, I mean, it's very diverse, but at the same time, I mean, I've been to those kind of shows where the artist performs only their own stuff as a DJ or something like that, and I find it extremely boring. You know, I mean, it's like, with the exception of, you know, people like DJ Pierre or sometimes Todd Terry, because they have such a large girth of different styles of stuff that makes it worthwhile. You know, the Masters at Work guys are the same way. But for the most part, you know, some bedroom producer is not going to be able to keep my interest for more than 45 minutes max. You know, it really needs something there. And I think that that's the way everybody should listen, to really find what really fits for what you feel. And then, you know, propagate that. Forget all the other bullshit. You know, don't bother with it. It's just like, you know, don't even give those things that you know are not good. Don't even use their names, you know, in jest, in favor, or in non-favor. You know, there's a few artists' names I will never say, just because I don't want to give their energies power in my life.
Yeah.
You know.
Again, that only entices my curiosity, but I'll just assume that I don't need to know. What about Bora? Is Bora listening to music? Now we're getting too meta, maybe. Like,
I guess it's changing. Like, sometimes I cannot listen to music at all. Sometimes I love to listen and support my friends. So of course, like, I listen to my friends' music, new releases. But like, I love to discover music through people. Like, I love when someone sends me a track, or because it has a story, and then I remind this person sending me this. So, and also sometimes I do some research, but it's a natural flow. It depends really. And I listen a lot to classical music, actually, because my parents are classical musicians, so kind of always had the habit to listen to a lot of Brahms at home, and it's kind of a safe space that I keep with me when I'm traveling. So yeah, but I'm really curious also, so I like to discover, but sometimes I cannot. Sometimes I'm done with sound and I cannot. I need to do something with my hands, I need to paint, I'm always like switching between different mediums. Yeah.
we can take another question from the audience too, since they were both good questions so far, or I can continue.
Was he whispering?
Yeah, there was one.
He's whispering.
What role you think, like the mediated tech that you're actually using in music, what effect that would have on how you define your practice? So as an example, I'm just sort of coming out of that animism talk and sort of just thinking a little bit about this idea of almost how you described the personas as almost a third person. It's almost suddenly the idea of the self as tool, as its own sort of extension. And I thought it's an interesting sort of parallel where maybe contradictory to what you said, Eric, about the idea of don't create or don't release until you finish creating. I would almost think one of the things about creating music today or anything with digital infrastructure is that we've got versioning, and we've got that ability of, you know, of having multiplicity and often returning to what we create or new versions. And thinking that, it sort of, it feels like interesting parallels with the idea of versions of self with your performance, but maybe try and think what, with the practice, with your actually, the tech and the infrastructure of the tech that you're using, how do you think that is defining your practice in itself outside of just the limits of the program?
That was a good question. Also a good question for Robert and Anna too, in kind of contrast to these folks. As Robert is lurking in the background. But yeah, this kind of question of how. Well, I kind of hear multiple questions there. How technology or how the kind of production means is sort of part and technology is part of the persona that you create, and then also this question of, in this kind of ephemeral electronic world, what the kind of different versioning might mean for that.
So far, technology hasn't really. I'm not Holly Herndon yet, okay? You know, I mean, I like her a lot, though. But I haven't really, it's really very organic so far, these creatures. I mean, they were brought up out of simple necessity, actually. Like Signor Sapo is called Signor Sapo is because I have a suit that looks like reptile skin. And I wore it to the top of Teotihuacan, thinking it would be nobody there at 6 o'clock in the morning, but then there was a bunch of kindergartners on a field trip. And they were like, Signor Sapo, which means Mr. Toad. So that's how Signor Sapo came to play. And I have all these songs that are kind of Latin influenced, but I was like, me. So Signor Sapo can get away with it. And so that's how he came about. But I didn't really, the technology thing, I don't know, because sometimes I write songs on a drum set or on a piano, or I pick up the violin. I don't care. I plug in the computer, I program a beat. It's all the same to me. I don't know. I don't really see, I don't consider my classical heritage as anything that, I don't hear it in my productions, but other people do. For example, I just think that I'm doing, basic melody line or something. But no, did you study classical? I said, yeah. But I don't hear it. You know what I mean? It's like when it becomes intrinsical to your being, that even these characters, they're not really, for me, they're not really an alternative. It's just another way for me to say something else. I don't really give them too much, they don't have too much weight yet. Not like you. I think yours are more developed, it sounds like, because they have performances and things. Yeah. Mine haven't gotten that far yet. They don't have any
maybe one day.
Mine are naked.
Plotting rebellion now. They're plotting a rebellion now.
That's right. Yeah, we may. Yeah, we may be giving them ideas even as we speak. So you'll find out.
I like that one question. I want my characters to write about me. I'm going to let them have that.
Yeah.
That should be interesting. Thank you. I still got that in my head.
There are fewer and fewer music critics anyway, so it's actually maybe better to, and oftentimes they write really badly. So maybe it's better to have these alternative personas actually write the review for you.
That's actually true. That's very true. A lot of really poor music critics lately.
Yeah.
I didn't until you mentioned it, I didn't think of it. Very strange. Go ahead.
I don't want to remind us of
that's a whole other
poor
subject.
Press, but yeah.
That's a whole other subject. That's another
there are some very good ones too. Some of my best friends are music critics. What about? But I think this could have some. Well, I actually wanted to ask Pauline about this in terms of costuming, because there's also sort of the technology and practice of making the costumes, right? Which is something that you kind of, I don't know what your background was that you came to kind of designing and making these things, but this stuff is kind of also significant, right?
You mean with the costume?
Yeah.
I'm completely self-taught.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I just love materials, and I work a lot with silicone. So I cast body parts Because for me, like all I do, like to answer your question linked to technology, like I think even if I use 3D scanning and those softwares like to sculpt, and it's always come from like this will to be just human. So it's a sort of body memory. When I 3D scan someone, it's just one time, like one moment, and it's a mark of this. Like this 3D scan is human to me because it's the body of my friend or my body that is that way on that day, and 10 years later, I can still come back to it, and it's really emotional. Actually, it's a memory of it. So everything I do is linked to that, like just being human. And of course, I deal with technology because it's I was almost born with that, you know. So it's natural to me, but I also love to use my hands, and I paint, and it's really primitive, my approach to this. So when I make a costume, like I don't really think about it. It's like what you were saying, like I just go for it, and yeah, that's my way to do it.
I don't know if you had a different perspective on these questions, Tan? No?
No, I don't have a different question. That's an answer.
There is a question.
There's a question. Yeah. We'll do some wood shedding too, I think. So that, you know, always with technology and learning, you want that kind of ease of picking something up, but sometimes it does mean reserving some time to learn stuff, which is something we'll have to grapple with this week. So some wood shedding and then immediately shifting to just applying it. Woodshed being the place that you go behind the, you know, to just kind of work on something.
Yeah, yes. There's a fine line. Anyway, wood shedding, there's a fine line between sort of getting a learning just a little, stretching a little bit further than normal. So like trying a new technique which you haven't done before, and then sort of like overreaching. So becoming, this would be a slight exaggeration, like I want to write poetry in Chinese. Step 1, learn Chinese, kind of thing. So you don't want to make the learning curve so steep that basically you're just doing like the cat is on the mat elementary stuff with your new tools. You want to learn a little bit of the new tool, of maybe a new technique, but not so much that it that mastering it becomes the content of what you make, you know, kind of thing.
Did the microphone reach the next question? Yes.
Aside from the artistic output that you get from these characters or personas, can you think of any other positive effects of this process that you go through, psychologically or spiritually, or are there any side effects to it, aside from
You mean positive side effects?
positive, yeah, or negative, or whatever?
For me, it's really simple. I would say it helps me to accept myself. So it's, and also to be free. Freedom, acceptation, blossom. Like I'm blossoming. And yeah, it makes me want to go further and just live, basically. So it's really simple, yeah, for me. I don't know about you.
Well, I think that the spirituality is always there. And that's kind of like a given duality. Outside of that, I was just saying, yeah, the spirituality is definitely always there.
Yeah.
They have a soul. They definitely have a soul because everything has a soul. Even an inanimate object, which is not really inanimate, has a soul.
True.
You know, so I think that ultimately, the more information or more time you spend with these characters, the more to life they become, like the Chucky doll.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little eerie because when you have like multiple personas, then you seem to have like other people sort of occupying your body. But I think the idea of like creating characters is something that's very ordinary and done all the time. You know, novelists create characters because they feel
Look
that
at
they have to
actors.
explore. Yeah, actors create personalities all the time. Well, that one is a lot closer to that, and I think it can, even actors being different persons can have that eerie bit. But like
I
a
know.
novelist
I know very well.
writing a character, or a cartoonist drawing like a talking dog, that's not thought of as being eerie ever at all. But these are sort of like creating characters is a way of like accessing truth. Even something as simple as arguing with yourself, because this thesis antithesis thing, you just basically are of literally are of two minds of something. And this is just like a more physical and theatrical manifestation of that. But this idea of like occupying different characters in order to think something through, it's very basic, a very basic human operation, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of presenting this a little bit as creating the persona as a fiction, but yeah, it seems that part of what a lot of artists are working through is how to kind of, I mean, we throw around self-expression like it's obvious what we mean, but that sometimes people have as an obstacle, right? The name that's attached to them or the way that they're seen by other people, and sometimes that doesn't accommodate changes that they're going through of various kinds, you know.
Yeah.
Plus, we get bored of our names at some point.
No, it's just funny because people would ask me, especially before they knew anything about me, they said, "What's your real name?" And I said to myself, "You think my imagination is so great? I made up the name Eric D. Clark. That's imagination for me to you. That's really boring. That's the most boring imaginative name I've ever heard of. Really." It just was like odd to me that people would think that that was a constructed name, because that's the way I was born. I never looked at it, never thought twice about it. That's just it, you know. And so that was always odd to me. It's like, what's your real name? You know, like, that is my real name. Oh, no, it's not.
I mean, our parents made this thing up at some point.
Yeah,
You know.
I mean, parents aren't always the brightest when it comes to naming their children.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and but I've never really gotten too crazy about artists that didn't use their real name in a professional sense. You know, I've always liked the artists, primarily the ones whose names were their names. Yeah. You know, if they had a stage name, I didn't really go for it. I might respect them, but I might not really want them as friends, you know, because I don't know them.
Well, especially if there's not kind of what Pauline did, where there's there's a reason for that persona. That's part of the performance, as opposed to just
but that's what I'm saying. That's
just a
different
name
thing.
without anything to go with it, right? Like
Yeah, but I mean, there's a different thing, though. I mean, I know you as Bora. That's all I know you as. I don't know you as Pauline. I didn't even know you were French until just now.
Yeah, true.
You see?
so that's kind of helpful in that way. That also,
Yeah, that's great. Humble is good.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I did see an article recently about there was this reality show, and the stupid thing was I'd seen the episode. I don't watch that much reality TV, I guess, or I thought that I didn't watch that much reality TV, and I had seen this episode, and it was something. The show was something called like Faking It, or it was a shot in the UK, and the premise of the show was that they take somebody out of their kind of normal life, and they put them in another role, and kind of, this is maybe the British side of this, kind of expect them to fail, right? Like, won't that be funny, because they won't be able to cut it. And so they took this kid who was like, I forget, so some kind of like upper class like school system, and they brought him down to a nightclub and made him a bouncer for the night. And I think, yeah, the producer's premise was that he would fail, but he actually kind of got into it. And then what, usually you figure that that's the end of it. It's this kind of fiction created for TV, but they looked him up some years later, and he had actually completely changed his life after that. He was so much more comfortable in the role of bouncer. I forget everything that happened. It was like he came out to his parents, he like dropped out of school, he like cut off some of his relations with his family and moved to Australia, and like lived a completely different life. But so the kind of what this sort of investigation was about was people whose sort of everyday identity as it had been essentially constructed for them by other people had become a kind of obstacle. So it wasn't actually, it was kind of the inverse of the way that people think of it, that this sort of identity was more real.
Why do you think governments have entire organizations that do nothing but programming people? Don't forget, that's a thing. It's a very, very big thing, actually. I mean, a lot of the war effort is actually spent on that kind of research. I'm just saying, you know.
I was just thinking that sounds like something that Kafka would have written. A man wakes up and finds out that he is a mask, you know.
Yeah.
And then the part that's not Kafka is that, and then a television producer decided to make him a bouncer, and that's how he found his true self. Became unmasked.
That's
Like
pretty
that
brilliant. I like that.
Yeah.
I'd like to meet this bouncer.
I have to look up the exact details of the story. I think we're running out of time or run out of time. Yeah, we could take one more question and then take a break, I guess.
Yes, there's a question.
Yeah? From Jan in the front. From the mild-mannered gentleman in the black baseball cap.
Just wanted to hear from you. I mean, there's plenty of ways you can make yourself embody a persona, I guess, clothing, names, and all of that. But listening to music in itself, already as a listener, not as a performer, sometimes makes me feel like I could be somebody else, or I am maybe this moment, you know. I remember when I was a teenager, I was listening to this grindcore stuff all the time on my bicycle, and I thought, like, nobody's gonna harm me, I'm on a tank or something in the city. So how is that for you when you perform music can you without any other props then shift in different personas, or is that maybe, yeah, how do you do that, or how important is that? Let's put it like this.
I don't know if there's anything important in it, but I mean, shifting between the personas and performance is obviously going to be a thing. I mean, it's akin to acting. You know, character development is not just an observation. Character development is an action, and when you have a character that you concentrate on, naturally there's going to be a crossing of, let's say, emotional bullet points or something like that, you know, things that pop off in the mind, or that maybe, like when I was working on this musical and I was writing for the main character, I became that character. I became this falsetto singing thing, and I wrote specifically, if you hear the songs, they sound nothing like me. But they're written especially for that entity who doesn't exist. It's just an idea. But yeah, it worked out. It's definitely there. I mean,
It's part of what you do as a DJ too, right? Or it's one way to think about DJing is not necessarily reprogramming people, but that you create some sort of space that allows the people listening to kind of get in a different mental
DJing is like surfing.
condition.
It's like surfing. It's like being the water on which the people surf.
Yeah.
That's what DJing is. And that's a decent analogy. And that's pretty much it. I mean, it's literally riding a wave.
But it's like surfing, but you're the ocean.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, nice.
Yeah. But you can also, since you're the ocean, you have a bit more of you're more like a wave machine. Quite literally, actually, when you think about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's like you have more control. I mean, the ocean, we can't, control it.
Yeah.
But a wave machine, you can turn it on or off, big waves, small waves.
True.
And that's what you're doing with a crowd in a dance, in a club situation. I think that's what's so intoxicating about it. However, most of the people who are intoxicated by it don't necessarily have the wherewithal to do it properly. You see a lot of pale copies, and it's quite interesting. I see the false euphoria in certain events, and it's just like, wow, that's so programmed. Then you go to an event where it's not programmed, and you see it doesn't happen that often. It's not every 3 or 4 minutes. Like, you can time it in regular places. When you actually go to some place where it's not a formulaic principle, then you see that, oh, okay, I feel something happening. Oh, yeah, okay, that's it. Okay, oof. Okay, now I can go back to the bar. You know what I mean? It's that kind of a thing. But it's like in certain, I've seen it in other places, I don't want to name any particular places, but a lot of places that have events on a very regular basis. And they're the form of before, it's almost like you can clockwork. You can tell when they're going to react to what, how. It's so predictable. And that's not really, I don't get enthusiastic about that. I want somebody to take me on a journey. I don't want to know where I'm going. I want to be, I don't want to have to answer any questions or ask any. I just want to go,
Yeah.
So,
Storytelling.
yeah.
How do you kind of relate to, I guess, this sort of question of how either you as a listener or people listening to you enter other mental states or other kind of, how that allows them to sort of assume other identities or states of being?
You mean when I perform, or?
Yeah, sure. Or maybe that's not something you think about. Or maybe it's something you think about when you go out and listen, actually.
Hard question. I never really asked myself this. Because it's really rarely that people come to me after a show, to talk. Like it happens. But I kind of like that we exchange something that doesn't need words. And what is the most powerful to me is to cross the eyes. During my performance with people, I do really feel that we connect on some level, and I do really respect the energy of everyone. So you feel that when you perform, that if you want to move in the space, that some people don't really want to interact with you, or they really want to, and so it's again like surfing, you respect that. And so what matters to me is to share emotions and for people to feel, then, or not to feel anything. That's also like an emotion to me. So it transmits something, and I don't really know how to develop this more, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact quote, but I remember Brian Eno was proposing that was a possible definition of art, was that it was a place that allowed you to become other people, in a safe to become somebody else. Like, I'm the sort of person who moves this way. So say there was like a whole lot of hysteria against rock and roll in the beginning because they thought that it was black music, that it was sexual music, that a person listening to it would begin to inhabit that kind of mental space, which was feared, and apparently feared correctly, because it really did allow people to have that imaginative participation in another way of being. So that's sort of like what the mask does. And I'm just thinking about your story, what you were saying about like music allowed you to become somebody else. I mean, that is so true of art that at least one artist, thinks that it might actually serve as a definition of art. Yeah, I just want to throw that in there.
Yeah. Well, thank you all. I think we have to wrap up, but this was lots of great food for thought and sort of reflections on the power of kind of music as deprogramming and not only programming and being like water and other things. So we'll switch from deprogramming back to programming, but of a different kind, with Robert and Anna after the break. But thank you all so much, and we'll take another 10-minute break while we reset.
Thank you.
Thank you.